Sarah Jane Loy was born in 1833 in Louisville, St. Lawrence County, New York. She was the eldest of 4 children in a family that was well respected within the local community. Her upbringing reflected the stability and values of a household rooted in responsibility and care. Tragically, her mother died in 1844 when Sarah was just 11, and her father passed away 2 years later, in 1846, leaving the 4 children orphaned. The family farm, modest in size, was inherited by the children and rented out, yielding an annual income of approximately $25 per child. Sarah Jane's character was often described as intelligent, cheerful, and lively. She possessed a natural attractiveness that drew attention in her community. Her early life, however, was punctuated by loss and misfortune, shaping a young woman acquainted with grief from a tender age. Despite these hardships, she maintained a hopeful demeanor, navigating adolescence under circumstances many would find challenging. In September 1849, Sarah Jane married a local man named John G. Their union, however, was short-lived. John G. died in 1852, leaving Sarah Jane a widow at the age of 19. By this point, she had already endured the loss of both parents and now her spouse. Seeking stability and support, she moved into the household of her uncle and aunt, Mr. Danforth Britton and his wife, who also resided in Louisville. Mr. Britton managed multiple responsibilities, including ownership of Harrison Britton's store and management of a tavern that doubled as a boarding house. Within this environment, Sarah Jane found a measure of security amid the turmoil of her earlier life. The Britton household provided a supportive setting where she could rebuild a semblance of normalcy while surrounded by family. Despite the repeated tragedies she had faced before her 24th year, Sarah Jane's intellect, cheerfulness, and resilience allowed her to navigate these losses with dignity. The combination of family support and her personal qualities positioned her as a figure both admired and well cared for in the local community, setting the stage for events that would dramatically alter the trajectory of her life in the years to come. James E. Eldridge was born in 1836 in Canton, St. Lawrence County, New York, into a family that was regarded as respectable within their community. In 1856, at the age of 20, his family moved to Iowa, and Eldridge accompanied them. Later that year, he chose to return to St. Lawrence County. In November 1856, Eldridge traveled to Louisville and introduced himself under the alias Mr. Edwin Aldrich. Under this assumed identity, he secured employment as a schoolteacher, integrating himself into the local community without revealing his true background. Shortly after beginning his position, Aldrich became acquainted with Sarah Jane Gould, recently widowed and living in the household of her uncle and aunt. He paid particular attention to her, and whispers began circulating regarding his intentions. The nature of their acquaintance evolved quickly, and in March 1857, Aldrich rented a room in Mr. Britton's boarding house. By April, he formally proposed marriage to Sarah Jane, who accepted. Following the engagement, Aldrich sought the consent of Mr. Britton, presenting himself as a man of means and reliable intentions. Aldrich claimed ownership of 600 acres of land in Iowa, which he had acquired through financial support from his father. Additionally, he spoke of a promised sum of $1,500, which he intended to invest in purchasing horses to be sold for profit. Mr. Britton, cautious due to Aldrich's previous small debts at the store and overdue rent, expressed measured enthusiasm. Despite Aldrich's assurances that he would settle all financial obligations once his funds arrived from Iowa, Mr. Britton's wariness persisted. Throughout this period, Aldrich maintained a demeanor of attentiveness and charm toward Sarah Jane, which impressed her and created an appearance of sincerity. The combination of his assumed identity, financial promises, and close proximity to Sarah Jane positioned him as a central figure in her life. While he appeared devoted and forward-looking, his ambiguous background and previous debts planted early seeds of doubt. The narrative of James E. Eldridge, operating as Edwin Aldrich, and his calculated positioning within the Gould household set the stage for the events that would follow in the critical months of 1857, culminating in tragedy. During April and May of 1857, James E. Eldridge, operating under the alias Edwin Aldrich, undertook multiple trips to Ogdensburg, a town approximately 30 miles from Louisville, He explained these journeys as necessary to arrange money he expected from his alleged holdings in Iowa. While in Ogdensburg, he visited Bell's jewelry store, where he unexpectedly encountered an old school acquaintance named Robinson Howe. Known to Howe as James E. Eldridge, Aldrich responded vaguely when asked about his recent activities. When questioned regarding teaching, he denied having undertaken any such work, despite holding a position as a local school teacher in Louisville. These contradictions contributed to early murmurs of doubt within the community, though no direct accusations were made at this stage. Upon returning to Louisville, Aldrich continued to speak of the anticipated funds, maintaining his narrative of financial opportunity from the West. Meanwhile, local concerns over his obligations began to surface. Mr. Jesse Harris, Mr. Britton's brother-in-law and business partner in Harrison Britton's store, confronted Aldrich regarding unpaid debts and lodging charges. He emphasized that future trust would be contingent upon immediate repayment, warning that failure to settle these accounts would result in Aldrich's removal from the boarding house. Aldrich assured Mr. Harris that all debts would be satisfied once his funds from Iowa arrived, maintaining consistency with the story he had conveyed to Mr. Britton. During this period, Aldrich spent evenings in the company of Sarah Jane Gould, who remained unaware of the growing suspicions surrounding his financial integrity. On one such evening, he stayed late at the boarding house, keeping Sarah Jane's company. At this time, Sarah Jane had adopted a nightly routine, taking a spoonful of Dr. Rogers' compound syrup of liverwort tar to alleviate a mild cough. This practice was noted for its effect in providing temporary relief. On Monday, May 25th, she took her customary dose of the medicine, as did Aldrich, who reportedly drank from the same or a similar vessel, and her sister Helen also partook. These interactions and the repeated mentions of expected money created a tension between trust and doubt among those observing the couple. The combination of Aldrich's ambiguous explanations, his contradictory statements to acquaintances, and the pressure from creditors introduced a climate of suspicion. While outwardly his relationship with Sarah Jane appeared affectionate and attentive, the undercurrents of uncertainty regarding his finances and honesty began to quietly shape perceptions within the household and among the community. This period marked the final days before the onset of Sarah Jane's illness, laying the groundwork for the events that would unfold in late May of 1857. On the morning following the taking of her nightly medicine, Sarah Jane Gould reported feeling unwell. She appeared pale and complained of general discomfort, which prompted her aunt, Mrs. Britton, to observe her closely. As the day progressed, Sarah Jane's condition deteriorated. She experienced severe stomach pains and frequent vomiting, forcing her to lie intermittently on the lounge couch. Concerned for her niece's well-being, Mr. Britton summoned Dr. Gibson, who conducted a thorough examination. Dr. Gibson determined that her symptoms resulted from irritation and inflammation of the stomach, prescribing a combination of ammonia and anodynes in an effort to alleviate her distress. Throughout her illness, Aldrich remained at Sarah Jane's side, administering her drinks and overseeing her treatment with a steady presence. He appeared attentive, offering reassurance and performing the role of caretaker. However, Mrs. Britton's recollection included a detail from several weeks prior. She had previously discovered a bottle of arsenic in Aldrich's room. At the time, she and her husband had been surprised by the presence of the substance, but had not pursued the matter further. With Sarah Jane now seriously ill, Mrs. Britton noticed that the bottle was missing, which heightened her concern and unease regarding the circumstances surrounding her niece's health. Dr. Gibson attempted to reassure Mrs. Britton, stating that, in his professional experience, he had never encountered a fatal arsenic overdose. Nevertheless, Sarah Jane's condition showed no significant improvement. Despite the administration of medicine, her complaints of severe stomach pain persisted, though she maintained a steady body temperature and exhibited no fever. Her family remained vigilant, monitoring her closely while Aldrich continued to remain in her presence, attending to her every need. By Saturday, May 30th, Sarah Jane briefly expressed a glimmer of hope, indicating that she felt some relief from her discomfort. She thanked her aunts, her sisters, and Aldrich for their care and support. However, this optimism was tragically short-lived. Later that day, she fell into delirium and succumbed to her illness, dying in the presence of family and Aldrich. The funeral was held 2 days later and was well attended, with mourners including relatives, friends, and neighbors. Observers noted that Aldrich's grief was conspicuous. He frequently sought the company of Sarah Jane's sister Helen. While some interpreted his mourning as genuine, others remarked that it appeared forced, lacking the natural expression of sorrow, foreshadowing later suspicion that would follow the events of her death. In the aftermath of Sarah Jane Gould's death, Mrs. Britton's attention returned to the possibility of foul play. While inspecting the room where Sarah Jane had died, she discovered an empty bottle of liverwort tar containing a white sediment at the bottom. Recognizing the potential significance of this substance, she immediately alerted her husband, Mr. Britton. Concerned by the discovery, he arranged for the contents to be analyzed by physicians first in Morristown and subsequently by Dr. Sherman in Ogdensburg. Laboratory examination confirmed that the residue was arsenic, establishing a tangible link between Sarah Jane's sudden illness and a potentially lethal substance previously within Aldrich's possession. Confronted with these findings, Edwin Aldrich exhibited visible agitation. He denied ever possessing arsenic and appeared distressed when informed of the analysis. His response did little to alleviate suspicion, and the discovery prompted Mr. Britton to escalate the matter formally. He approached County Coroner Ripley and requested a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding Sarah Jane's death. The body was subsequently exhumed, and a post-mortem examination was conducted by Doctors Ripley, Paddock, and Gibson. Although they were able to assess the deceased's organs, the lack of chemical testing equipment limited their conclusions. No visible traces of arsenic were detected at this stage, leaving the precise cause of death undetermined. During examination, however, an unexpected revelation emerged. Sarah Jane had been approximately 8 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. The jury overseeing the inquest ultimately certified the cause of death as unknown. Despite the inconclusive findings, suspicions surrounding Aldrich intensified. The following day, he was found in a state of acute illness, exhibiting vomiting and severe stomach pains. Dr. Gibson was summoned and observed a white powder residue at the bottom of the vessel from which Aldrich had been drinking. Based on his knowledge and prior experience, Dr. Gibson concluded that the young man's symptoms were consistent with arsenic ingestion. Aldrich remained ill for several days, but eventually recovered fully. Community perception of the events began to shift towards certainty of Aldrich's involvement. The combination of the empty arsenic-containing bottle, the post-mortem revelations, and Aldrich's own sudden illness fueled widespread suspicion. Concerned members of Louisville's population discussed the possibility that Aldrich had intentionally poisoned Sarah Jane. In response to mounting pressure, law enforcement intervened, and Aldrich was formally arrested. Following his apprehension, Dr. Sherman conducted a more extensive chemical analysis at his Ogdensburg surgery on the preserved organs removed during the post-mortem. His examination detected traces of arsenic, providing substantive evidence that strengthened the case against Aldrich. Consequently, he was formally charged with murder, marking the transition from local suspicion to legal prosecution. The discovery of arsenic, combined with the circumstances of Sarah Jane Gould's illness and death, established the foundation for the criminal proceedings that would follow. The trial of James E. Eldridge commenced on December 10, 1857, in St. Lawrence County, with the prosecution presenting a detailed case against him. Central to the argument was Eldridge's use of an alias, presenting himself to the community as Edwin Aldrich while concealing his true identity. The prosecution portrayed him as deceitful, emphasizing that this duplicity reflected a pattern of behavior inconsistent with the responsibilities and trust expected of a member of Louisville society. They highlighted the discrepancies between his statements regarding financial resources and the reality of his unpaid debts and rent, framing the narrative that Eldridge's outward respectability masked calculated intentions. Chemical evidence formed the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Dr. Sherman, who had conducted a thorough examination of the organs preserved from the post-mortem, testified that traces of arsenic were present, establishing a direct link between Eldridge and the cause of Sarah Jane Gould's death. The prosecution further emphasized that Eldridge had access to arsenic prior to her illness, while no such substance was found in his possession afterward. His constant presence by Sarah Jane's side during her decline, coupled with his admission to administering medicine, was presented as proof that he had the opportunity to introduce the poison. Additional elements, including his absence during critical periods of the inquest and his sudden illness, interpreted by some as an attempted suicide, were framed as indicators of guilt and consciousness of wrongdoing. A motive was also suggested by the prosecution. Sarah Jane's pregnancy and the potential for Eldridge to desire a relationship with her sister Helen were presented as factors that could have influenced his actions. Testimonies were provided by Mr. and Mrs. Britton, Sarah Jane's siblings, household staff, and friends, each detailing interactions that illustrated his attentiveness and the apparent devotion he displayed publicly. Medical witnesses corroborated the sequence of illness, decline, and death, reinforcing the link between Eldridge and the fatal outcome. In response, the defense acknowledged that Eldridge had been in possession of arsenic, but contended that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he had administered it with felonious intent. They emphasized that the original post-mortem by Doctors Ripley, Paddock, and Gibson had revealed no visible arsenic. They challenged the integrity of Dr. Sherman's findings, noting that the organs were stored in a pail coated with white lead paint, a substance known to contain arsenic, and had been transported unsecured over multiple locations before testing. Citing medical jurisprudence, the defense argued that such handling could have compromised the validity of the chemical analysis. Additionally, the defense disputed the claimed motive related to pregnancy, presenting testimony that Sarah Jane had menstruated a week before her death, contradicting assertions of imminent childbirth. They argued that the prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, and that critical questions regarding the administration of arsenic and Eldridge's intent had not been definitively resolved. The defense counsel requested the jury to consider the presumption of innocence and to weigh the evidence with caution, highlighting gaps in the timeline and inconsistencies in witness accounts. The trial proceeded with careful attention to the sequence of events leading to Sarah Jane Gould's death, scrutinizing both Eldridge's actions and the medical evidence. Testimony and argumentation extended over several days, presenting the jury with contrasting interpretations of the same circumstances. Ultimately, the trial underscored the tension between circumstantial evidence and the standards of proof required for a conviction, laying the groundwork for the jury's deliberation and subsequent verdict. The jury retired to deliberate on December 22, 1857, following several days of testimony, evidence presentation, and closing arguments. After several hours, they returned with a guilty verdict against James E. Eldridge. The court reconvened the following day, and the presiding judge formally sentenced Eldridge to death for the murder of Sarah Jane Gould. Despite the conviction and sentence, Eldridge maintained his innocence, asserting that he had neither administered arsenic nor caused her death. In response to the verdict, his attorneys filed an appeal, citing concerns regarding the handling of evidence and the reliance on circumstantial testimony. They emphasized the potential compromise of chemical analysis due to the transportation and storage of the organs, and challenged the interpretation of motive, particularly the claim regarding Sarah Jane's pregnancy. Judge James granted a stay of execution and approved the request for a retrial, temporarily halting the enforcement of the death sentence and allowing legal proceedings to continue. During his confinement in Canton Prison, awaiting the possibility of retrial, Eldridge's health deteriorated. He developed symptoms of consumption, which worsened over time. Despite medical attention, his condition proved fatal. Eldridge died at the age of 21, never having faced a second trial. His death effectively closed the legal proceedings, leaving the community and the family to reconcile with the unresolved nature of justice. The conclusion of Eldridge's incarceration marked the final chapter in the case arising from Sarah Jane Gould's death. With Eldridge's death, the formal legal process ended, leaving lingering questions surrounding the circumstances of her death. The sequence of events, from her sudden illness to the inquest, trial, and Eldridge's demise in prison, encapsulates a case where suspicion, circumstantial evidence, and tragedy intersected, bringing an abrupt and definitive end to a young man's life, while leaving the memory of Sarah Jane Gould preserved in the community.